Okay, now we are official. Good evening, everybody. And thank you for joining me for the last session of that part of the virtual tour. And we are in Jerusalem for 3 weeks now. And today we'll bring it to conclusion by visiting what is called the Way of the Cross, also known in Latin as the Via Dolorosa, not the Via della Rosa, which is the way of flowers in Spanish, but the Via Dolorosa, or the way of roses, which is the way of sorrow, the way of agony. And this is one of those intriguing places in Jerusalem because it's almost a must see by every Christian group that comes to the country. Although there is a debate about some locations along the way, even about the place of the tomb and which is the right place for Golgotha. We'll speak about it briefly. There are a few opportunities, a few possibilities, and we'll just touch on that briefly because when people speak about the way of the cross, we speak about the path that has to connect two places. Number one, the trial of Jesus. Number two, the place of the crucifixion, the tomb, and the resurrection. And unless we agree about those two places, and there is some controversy even today among scholars, which is the place of Praetorium, and where exactly was the place of the skull of Golgotha, it will be very hard to establish a path and to point at it to say, we know the place beyond any doubt. Please keep in mind that 3 centuries have passed between the total destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman army in 70 AD and until the days of Constantine, his mother Helena, and let's call it the Christian Revolution, in order to try to locate places when Jerusalem was in a terrible condition, totally destroyed. A Roman town was built on top of the Temple's Day city, erased everything down to the ground. So to try to find those places when Jews and Christians alike were not permitted to visit Jerusalem, all these places were totally destroyed and covered. It won't be easy 400 years or 300 years later to try to come to the city without having any good evidences, any good records or reports, and to try to redeem those places. For that reason, a lot of confusion about what would be the right location. But again, we speak about sentimental issues, we speak about religion, we speak about faith, and therefore you don't have to prove anything mathematically if you wish. If you believe that this is the path, you're right, and you don't have to prove anything in any way here. But we need to understand, even for the sake of history, how the way of the cross came to be, and to point at more than one, all right? There's more than one way of the cross in Jerusalem. One is the official one, that even the streets are marked with the signs, the way of the cross. But to be more accurate historically, we have to consider at least 2 or 3 other possibilities, and that's what I would like to share with you. Of course, I'll try to bring some short video segments after this almost a month of closure now. It was impossible to move around the country, but I'll try to fit some of those in. And we are going to walk, so to speak, the way of the cross from the place of the trial Praetorium to the place of the crucifixion, and again, the tomb and the resurrection. Some of the names are not even very clear. Let me try to clarify that. When people speak about Golgotha, they speak about Calvary, and these terms have to be explained. Golgotha means a skull in Aramaic. Calvary, or Calvaria, means skull in Latin. And therefore, Mount Calvary is indeed Golgotha in 2 different languages. And since most of the visitors to Jerusalem spoke foreign languages, the term Golgotha is not as well known today as the term Calvary will be. We also need to understand that different Christian groups have different ways of the cross, so to speak. You do know, because you've been there, that the Protestant world will end up in the garden tomb, or the tomb in the garden. That should be the right term, and not the garden tomb. And most of the others will go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And which one is which? So again, there is an historical version to that, but these are matters of faith. And usually when you speak about holy sites and holy locations, it will be very hard to prove. The proof is not important. This is something that you hold dear to yourself. And again, you don't have to prove it in any way. The whole idea behind holy places, let me clarify that very quickly before we go to the presentation. We need to understand a very important principle. I think that you'll know that the Bible doesn't mention any place and calls it holy, except for one, and that's Mount Moriah. The Bible doesn't call places holy. The idea that places are holy is foreign and strange to the Bible. And the problem was, let's say, the weakness of the human nature, because if you try to locate a certain place and you call the place holy, then maybe you build a building over there, church, synagogue, doesn't really matter. after a while, people will start coming to worship the place and not the message behind the place. And for that reason, the Bible is against holy places. For that reason, we don't know where Moses was buried. The Bible says God himself buried Moses, and nobody knows the place of his burial. And therefore, when you speak about the Jewish idea, and even at early Christianity, places were not important. But when you try to educate the masses on a new religion, a new way of life, as Constantine did, and without the modern media, he tried to reach out to 50 to 60 million people, which is the estimated population of the Roman Empire. The question was, how do you do that to people who are illiterate, people who are very simple-minded? You want to teach them about a country so far away, about places that never seen before or heard before. It developed also what will be called the Holy Land or the Terra Santa, and places were now located. There was a whole procedure that lasted for centuries, because the idea was it's part of educating the masses. And a priest could basically tell this congregation in small churches in the European countryside, well, I'm teaching you about a place that you never heard before, but if you're willing to recruit the money and you're willing to spend the savings of a lifetime and go to the country that I'm teaching you about, you can see places with your very eyes. And see places, not just the countryside, not just the landscape, you need to go and touch and be able to connect to a certain location. And that started the whole forgive me industry to locate as many holy places as possible, and then to build churches on them and to make that connection with the scriptures. And once the Catholic Church was offering indulgences for the journey, it was a done deal. It was part of your redemption to take the money that you're saving all of your life and to spend it to go to Jerusalem or to Palestine and go to visit those places and locations. And I'm sure that you thought that the idea is that everybody who came, you want to follow the path of Jesus from Praetorium to Mount Calvary. Let me surprise you. That concept that we have one mandatory way to follow was only introduced in the 14th century, not before that. So speaking about the way of the cross, speaking about the mandatory way that many Christian groups are taking today, to go from Praetorium, which was in the Antonia fortress, and we mentioned it a couple of times, to Mount Calvary, that is 14th century, not prior to that. And we have a lot of itineraries. Itinerary is a pilgrim's diary. Everything which is described in a geographical order will be called an itinerary. And none of them speaks about the way of the cross. Interesting. They speak about coming to Jerusalem. If the city was in Christian hands or Muslim hands, there were some differences, but they speak about having a list of places to visit. There were some parades, especially for certain holidays, but the idea that you follow one path, this was only introduced because of historical reasons, by the way, in the 14th century, not prior to that. But the impact of it was absolutely enormous, because you do know that today Catholic churches, every Catholic church, will have the Station of the Cross represented on the walls of the building. It can be with pictures, it can be with Roman characters, it doesn't really matter. But once Jerusalem was hard to access, and there was such a time in the early Ottoman occupation, instead of coming to Jerusalem, the Franciscans, who are the custodians of the Holy Land, had special permission given by the Pope to imitate, to duplicate, to follow the way of the cross, not in Jerusalem, it was not accessible now, but in their own churches. And until 1865, amazing, 1865, it had to be a Franciscan, in order to make those stations in any church, Benedictine, Jesuit, doesn't really matter. It was the prerogative of the Franciscans only. Today, everybody can, but that gave them a lot of power and a lot of influence. And therefore, the Franciscans grew to be one of the most important, let's say, Catholic Fathers' orders as a result of the power that they gained in Jerusalem, where they were hosting, accommodating all the pilgrims. So anybody who came to Jerusalem heard one story, the Franciscan story. And guess what? And I don't mean to ridicule, I don't mean to criticize, but if you come to visit in my shop, if you come to eat in my restaurant, and stay overnight in my guest house, that will add a lot of money, of course, to the treasury. So some of those stations of the cross, some of the path was simply thought and created because of really, let's say, earthly reasons and not godly necessarily. And again, you can be cynical about that. We need to face the truth. It was always part of the consideration when you speak about developing the holy places. It was the balance of powers in Europe. It was a struggle within the Christian world. Who will have more property? Human nature is always getting involved. Every religion has the same procedures. So Christianity in that case was not unique in that regard. Let me bring up the presentation, and We'll start, as we always do, with the slide that you all know so well by now. I just need one thumb up to make sure that you can all see that. Okay, thank you, Sue. And let me minimize that for just a minute for myself. Well, we speak, of course, about the Roman era when we speak about the way of the cross, although the way itself only took place someplace around here in the late Muslim era. We speak about the days of Jesus. We speak about the Roman Jerusalem. We speak about Jerusalem under King Herod that was built as a Roman city predominantly. And we speak about a city that was totally razed to the ground by the Roman army. And as we said, that's part of the confusion. When we speak about the map of Jerusalem today, these are just the street signs that you see in different places. The writing in Hebrew is different, right? But it's all called the Via Dolorosa or Tariq al-Ashal in Arabic. And this is the one in Jerusalem because there's more than one. You need to know that in Rome, for example, twice a year, they're imitating the way of the cross, going between the Colosseum down to the Roman Forum. And sometimes even the Pope is attending. It's a great honor for the Franciscans. But again, you have those Via Dolorosas, plural, not just in Jerusalem, but these processions, the Franciscans are still conducting today in other parts of the world as well. Once again, lots of power and lots of influence to the minor brothers of St. Francis from Assisi, which is the official name of the Franciscans, founded 1209 by St. Francis. Well, here is the map of Jerusalem today, and this is important to emphasize of today because the city walls were not like that back in the days of Jesus. We'll see how they used to look like. But today you start walking in the area of the Antonia Fortress. Antonia Fortress, named after Mark Antony, Herod's patron, was built by Herod and named after him. And that was the headquarters for the Roman governor when he was in Jerusalem. And that's what made it Praetorium. Praetorium simply means headquarters. And that location was carefully chosen by him. It's on the northern side of Temple Mount, an excellent commanding post. And the only reason for the Roman governor to come to Jerusalem was to maintain law and order, and that will be the hot spot. And for that reason, you want to be as close as possible to the temple, and that's what made the Antonia Fortress Praetorium. So the trial of Jesus took place here. Let me just remind you what were the 24 last hours in the life of Jesus in his ministry, the public one. It started outside the walls of this city, where the Last Supper, after they had the Passover meal, they all went out to the Garden of Gethsemane. That's where Jesus was arrested. They took him to the house of Caiaphas, believed to be someplace around here. And the following morning, through the streets of Jerusalem, all the way to Pontius Pilate. And after the trial, Pontius Pilate sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, someplace around here, who sends him back to Pontius Pilate. And after the trial, Jesus goes with the cross. If you want to follow the Catholic Via Dolorosa, and we'll speak about that, is going someplace like this. Today, the whole path is within the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. That will be the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in what is called the Christian Quarter of today. Or if you choose to go to the Garden Tomb, which is the other possible location, when you come down to the street corner, you make a right. And that will be your way of the cross if you believe that the Garden Tomb is the place and not the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. What makes the whole concept more confusing is that the Bible doesn't give us any directions. If the Bible had told us that they came out from Praetorium and they were heading down the hill, or they were going west and then they turned right to left, that would make our lives a lot easier today. But the Bible gives us no clue to which direction Jesus went, holding or carrying the cross, And therefore, we need to use some ideas about crucifixion to the Roman mindset, about ideas of burial for the Jewish mindset. We speak about a Jewish tomb after all, and that will lead us to look at two different locations, but it all depends also on the walls of Jerusalem. You see, if the walls of the city were like that in the days of Jesus, then that location will be impossible. Because Jews did not bury people inside the city. The tomb of Joseph of Arimathea was outside the walls of Jerusalem, period. And therefore, the walls of the city had a different path, as we'll see in just a minute in the next slide. So when today people speak about the way of the cross, that's what they speak about, the path that starts in the Antonia Fortress and then goes down to the Central Valley, climbs up the hill for the upper city, and ends in what is called today the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. If you look at this map, which is more accurate, and I hope that all of you remember the model that we saw in Jerusalem, that will show you the walls of Jerusalem back then. Please ignore this one. This wall did not exist. So the wall of the city was the one that you see around here. Josephus Flavius, the historian, calls it the second wall. So it starts at the Antonia fortress and following the same path. But once you come to this location, you are departing, you're leaving the city walls and gates. And this place, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre of today, will be outside the city walls. Today, the wall goes like this. As we said, that's what confuses so many people so much, because we keep saying that the tomb had to be outside the walls and you're within the walls. But these are the walls of the 16th century town. And we are looking for the walls of the first century town, and that will be the path for the first century. All scholars agree, so this is almost beyond any doubt. But again, not everybody does agree about Antonia to be the place of the trial. Some scholars do believe even today that the trial of Jesus took place in Herod's palace, right? So Herod's palace, this is the garden tomb, right? The path to go to the garden tomb. Herod's palace was located at Jaffa Gate. And some scholars do believe that the Roman governor did not position himself in the Antonia fortress, but in Herod's palace. If this is the case and the trial took place here, and this is Mount Golgotha, then the way of the cross has to go someplace like this. You leave the city walls through the Jaffa Gate area, and you're coming from the west, and that's where the crucifixion took place. So keep in mind, there was no consensus about two locations. Where was the trial? And where is Mount Calvary? Of course, you have multiple possibilities for the way of the cross. And therefore, the one that we all follow today, or people that come to Jerusalem, is more a traditional path. It could be the real one as well. But as I just pointed out, if you believe that the garden tomb is Mount Golgotha, that will be a way of the cross. If you believe that the trial took place at Herod's palace, then that will be a way of the cross. One thing is beyond any doubt, speaking about this area, that the first part of the walk coming down from the Antonia fortress into the central valley has to be the authentic one, if indeed the trial of Jesus took place at the Antonia fortress and not at Herod's palace. So it depends what is the scholar that you read his books, and depends who you're talking to when it comes to where was the authentic path. There are three possibilities, all right? If you think that this is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it's either the one marked in red or the one marked in the dotted line here. If you go to the garden tomb, then there's this one, and you can add another one. If you believe that the trial took place here, but the garden tomb is indeed the place for the cross, then we need to add another one that goes all the way to the garden tomb. I know it's confusing, but once again, when you try to point at the history behind that, we need to know the details. It would be much easier for me to tell you, listen, this is the way, know that whatsoever, everybody will be happy. I wish things were that easy. Things are not that easy. And I'm more committed to try to share history with you in Jerusalem. And of course, not try to convince you which is the right one. This is something that you have to decide for yourselves. So when we speak about this confusion, I think that it's quite clear to understand why we are confused about the path, about the sites, and about the different locations. Let's both speak about the way of the cross, and there will be some information here. Well, as I said, until the 14th century, there was no mandatory way. And we know that because we read the books of the pilgrims, and we read how they describe the visit to Jerusalem. They will speak about a certain parade that will go from the Garden of Gethsemane to Mount Zion. Why Mount Zion? Because this was the place the Franciscans were able to purchase. So obviously everybody went to visit their place to Mount Zion, but nobody speaks about a path that everybody followed as we do today when you go to Jerusalem. So these itineraries do not speak about any particular way until the 14th century, and we speak about the reason why. As I said, to try to identify places will not be easy. When Aelia Capitolina was built by the Emperor Adrian, he was dismantling homes in Jerusalem to reuse the stones. Most of the city was in ruins anyhow after the Great Revolt. And therefore, to try to find those places where Jews and Christians alike were not permitted to visit Jerusalem, that was a challenge for itself. So how authentic are the places? I'll let you to be the judge of that, although it's possible. But you need to understand, archaeology really helps a lot. I mean, you can say that over the last century, when massive excavations started in Jerusalem, we can identify today Praetorium beyond any doubt. right? Or the Antonian fortress. The question is, was Praetorium the Antonian fortress, or maybe it was the palace of Herod? We know Herod's palace beyond any doubt today, thanks to excavations. So we do know more archaeology, but we cannot make the connection beyond any doubt. Where was Praetorium? Praetorium was a place where the Roman governor established his headquarters. And that can be anywhere, basically. It does make sense that if you come to the city, you want to be as close as possible to Temple Mount because this will be the hot spot. And therefore, that will be the place of the trial. Can we prove that beyond any doubt? We cannot. So you need to use some common sense as well when you put the pieces together to try to answer some of these questions. Here we go back. And as I said, for the 4th century, the days of Constantine and on, it was Helena, his mother, not a young woman, 82 years of age, that was sent over to Palestine, to Jerusalem. 327 AD was the year, and she was on a mission. And the mission was to try to locate as many places in Jerusalem, in other parts of the country as well. And the question was, okay, the place was located, now what? You see, to make the connection that a church will be built on top of the ancient site to protect the site, and that to be a house of prayer and worship, somebody had to invent a system because that was not done before. To make the connection of scriptures, places, and holy sites on places, this is something that was invented, forgive me for the term, in the days of Constantine and on. And that's what developed later on, the holy geography, the idea of the Terra Santa, the Holy Land. It was a mean of education, educating the masses, that had developed later on to be a mean of politics as well. It was a money issue as well. So this was something that was a necessity and part of educating the masses in the Roman Empire. Well, we don't have any sources, as we said, not even in the days of the early Muslim era, not even in the days of the Crusaders. We do not know about any mandatory path. Now, please understand that when Christian pilgrims came to Jerusalem, and the city was in Christian hands, and that was the case for part of the time, everything was easy. You were not limited anywhere you want to go. You had the variety of options to choose from. You don't have to hire a Franciscan guide. You can hire somebody else. And therefore, people were more free to travel around, to wander around without any limitation, without anybody telling them what to do. But when Jerusalem was in Muslim hands, Christian pilgrims were still welcome, because a big part of the economy was the money that those pilgrims brought with them. But since the city was Muslim, the last thing the authorities wanted to see is conflict between the Christian pilgrims and the local Muslims. And therefore, to try to police the city, to try to make things quiet, to avoid any kind of confrontation, even physical violence, something had to be done. Something had to be done to protect the Christian pilgrims when the city was in Muslim hands. And it was one of the reasons that the way of the cross had been developed later on. It was a simple necessity also to protect the lives of these pilgrims from the instigated Muslim mob, because the authorities were interested to have pilgrims come. They brought money with them. But the sentiments of the local masses was totally antagonistic to the Christian visitors that came to Jerusalem, sometimes even today. You can walk through the markets of old Jerusalem, you go through the Muslim quarter, of course there's no violence, etc., but you can sometimes feel a very unpleasant atmosphere over there. And that can be based on politics. That's how they make a living. They need people to come because that's how they make a living. But sometimes you can feel the tension in the air, and that can be because of many reasons. It's not new, it was always like that. And therefore, to guarantee the safety of the Christian pilgrims when Jerusalem was in Muslim hands, that will be a big challenge for the Muslim authorities. Well, there's the Crusaders, as I said, the Christians are dominating the area, and we don't have any evidence about following the way of the cross, which brings us basically to the aftermath of the Second Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, when the tension between the Christian world and the Muslim was so high that after the last Crusader was expelled from Palestine, 1291 was the year, the last thing that the locals wanted to see are Christian pilgrims who want to come to the city once again. And for that reason, for nearly 40 years, was a complete cessation of pilgrimages to Jerusalem. We don't have a single evidence, we don't have a single itinerary of a Christian pilgrim that mentions his visit to Jerusalem, not even one. And then something happened. And that something will bring the Christian world back. When I say Christian, please understand, the Catholic world back to Jerusalem. And let me say something else, like a sidetrack for just a minute. When you speak about Christians, we need to be a little careful here. because we speak about Greek Orthodox as well. And after the Great Schism in the church in 1054, the Christian world is divided. The Greek Orthodox world is well integrated into the Middle Eastern area. They know the Arab population. They mingle and live with them all the time. They are respected by the local population, not the Catholics. And therefore, there was a struggle within the Christian world. Who will have the upper hand in Christian holy sites? Will it be the Armenians, or maybe the Greek Orthodox, or maybe the Catholics? The Armenians had an advantage. They were very loyal to the Muslim empires. They were sending soldiers to have Christian units, amazing, Christian soldiers that fought for the Muslim empire. And they were hoping to get benefits in Jerusalem, and they did. And then they did the Greek Orthodox. Catholics were the hated ones because Catholics came as foreigners. They spoke a different language. They were not integrated into the local society. And the main enemy of the Catholics occupying Jerusalem by the Crusades were not the Muslims. It was number one to kick out as quickly as possible the Greek Orthodox Christians so they can take the places and practice the Catholic way. Now, this story is not very often told because it's an unpleasant one for Christian history. But we need to understand that kind of struggle as well. The Muslims in this part of the world favor the local Christians much more than the Catholics. The Crusaders were not Greek Orthodox Christians. The Crusaders were Catholics. And therefore, the Muslim view made this distinction. They could coexist very easily with the Greek Orthodox, not with the Catholics. And once the Crusades came to an end, there were Christians in the country, Greek Orthodox, and you could give them the rights back. But once again, money talks, so to speak, and now the Catholic world is coming back and they have invested quite a lot of money. Here's what we know. We do know that only in 1333, open negotiations started between the Sultan of Egypt that had Palestine in his dominion as well. We speak about rulers called the Mamelukes. Mamelukes means the slave kings. Believe it or not, there was a whole time in Egypt's history that they were governed by kings or by emperors that started their career as Christian slaves that were captured by the Muslims and they converted them to Islam. They did not have any families and therefore there was no inheritance. They were cut off from the families. They were trained to be warriors and they became to be also the emperors. And they had every interest in the world to have Christians come because Christians brought money with them and that will increase their influence, of course, in the city as well. And this time, for the first time, it wasn't who conquers the city has also the upper hand. An agreement was made in 1333. About 34,000 ducats of gold changed hands, and ducats of gold were the dollars of the ancient world. And that currency was the Florentine currency from Florence, 34,000. Agreement was signed, and now the Catholics have rights in Jerusalem once again. The document is fascinating to read, how the Muslim authorities are consenting that the Catholics will have in every place the altars area. They'll have the right to perform mass on the altars area, and the local Christians will only have the sides of the building, which means the buildings are not divided, but the Catholics will have the upper hand. And also the problem was that who is going to represent the Catholic world in Jerusalem? Who is going to be the one to do these things in behalf of the Christian world? And that was the Pope's choice. And the Pope, Clement VI, that was the name back then, decided after the agreement was signed that it's going to be the Franciscan that will represent Catholicism and Christianity in Jerusalem. So 1342, a special bull was issued by the Pope. That was the 21st of November. And the Franciscans were basically made to custodians, to be the custodians of the Holy Land. And that's how they arrived to the area. So land was purchased and rights were given. And keep in mind, it wasn't just an understanding. We speak about an official contract that committed the Muslim world basically to protect Christian rights in Christian holy places. But the question was, what places are you interested in? And how much money you're willing to pay, not just for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but for the rest of it, and what was available. Keep in mind, we speak of people live in town. And if the Christian think, listen, this place is holy to us, but the Muslim family lives there, no way you can get it until you have the opportunity maybe to bribe the local, maybe pay them more money. And therefore, we speak about a very dynamic issue. Station number 4, for example, until about 10 years was in a certain location. The owner of the building wanted to open a pizza place, so they moved the station to the next building. The city just lives its life, and there are challenges and there are problems. And therefore, to speak about the way of the cross, we need to understand how dynamic it was and what were the challenges that people had in Jerusalem regarding that. But officially, the custody of the Holy Land was founded in 1342. The Franciscans are in the city since 1342. Their goal is to redeem as many Christian places as possible. And now it's not just the goodwill of the Muslims, it's a contract. And that contract had to be kept very zealously by both sides. It did not commit the Ottomans that took the place from the Mamelukes, but as long as the Mamelukes were in charge, everything worked by that agreement between the Pope, represented by the Franciscans, and the Muslim authorities. It's not just that you try to redeem as many Christian places as possible. You're responsible to accommodate the pilgrims. You're responsible to accompany them from the harbor of Jaffa. You're responsible for the good behavior. And if one of them will commit crime in any way, it will be the Franciscans held responsible. It was not the criminals' issue, it was the Franciscans. And therefore, it gave them a lot of influence and power, and they charged for the tours, and it made them one of the richest groups in the Catholic world. It's interesting to note that the official name of the Franciscans is the Minor Brothers, and they're following three main vows. One of them is poverty. So as individuals, they're really poor, they don't have any possessions. As an order, this is maybe the richest order in the Catholic world, would be the Franciscans. Many donations were given to them. Keep in mind, they are holding the whole of the Terra Santa in behalf of the Catholic world. Who would not respect these people to send donations over to support them? And therefore, as individuals, we speak about a very important principle, poverty. As a group, very, very wealthy. Well, there's a story that St. Francis went to Rome, and the Pope Innocent shows him around the beauty of the palace and all the gold and everything. And he looks at Francis and says, well, I guess I can no longer say that I do not have any gold or silver. And Francis says, yes, but you cannot say stand up and walk as well. So that was a little bit of criticism to criticize the Pope for maybe being very wealthy, but losing totally his position as a spiritual leader. And that typifies the medieval days. Long before the days of Martin Luther, the church was criticized heavily by groups or within Catholicism. Martin Luther was the one, of course, that led to the total separation, but it wasn't the first time. There was some criticism inside the church vis-a-vis the behavior of the Pope. So now we have the places, we have the Station of the Cross, and these were evolved over the years. And let's follow them one after the other. After the Franciscans occupied the area, there were those that also decided on the stations. Today it's 14, but it used to be a time of 22. All depends on what were the circumstances. Well, station number 1 is the condemnation of Jesus, and we are going to go back and forth now. Some pictures of the station. Station number 1 today is a Muslim school, and therefore people don't have access to it. So you're standing outside the street. If you're a Catholic procession, and many do, you carry a cross with you, and you stop by each station, and you sing a hymn, and you say a little prayer. It takes about an hour and a half or so to walk the Catholic way, stopping at each station. So this is station number 1, the condemnation. Station number 2 will be basically Jesus carrying the cross. That will be a small chapel commemorating that. Station number 3, he falls with the cross for the first time. Now keep in mind, the stations are a combination of events that you read in the Gospels and traditions. Out of 14 stations, 5 are traditions. The Bible says nothing about Jesus falling with the cross. There are 3 times that he fell with the cross, and 3 stations are commemorating that. The Bible says nothing about Jesus meeting Mary, his mother, and talking to her. Station number 4, the Bible says nothing about Veronica. Mel Gibson does in his book, The Passion of the Christ, but not in the Bible. So station number 6, Veronica, is not in the scriptures either. So the others, of course, are biblical, and the last 5 stations are inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So back now to the stations. We speak about number 3, Jesus falling with the cross for the first time. Number 4, meeting his mother Mary. By the way, they had to move that to a next building. So this one is no longer in this location. Number 5, Simon from Cyrene is assisting Jesus with the cross. Number 6, Veronica, a young woman, is assisting Jesus and cleans his face as he's walking up the street. Veronica, by the way, is a combination of 2 words in Latin, vera icona, or the true image. Station number 7, the second falling with the cross. Station number 8 is only marked by a small pillar here. It's Jesus meets the daughters of Jerusalem. That's, of course, in the scriptures. Number 9, the third follow with the cross. And the last 4 stations are shown in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Let's have a word about that, because that's where the word of the cross ends. Or if you go to the garden tomb, it ends in the garden tomb. This is the facade of the building. I'm not sure that all of us been there, because sometimes when we have the bigger groups, and sometimes depends on the pastor and the leader, sometimes we are told very clearly, don't go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It may confuse people. People will find it as a contradiction to what they believe in. Well, I'd say that at least historically, the building has a value. So I'm not sure that all of you visited the place, but if you did, maybe you remember the facade of the building and the entrance to the church. So this will be the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which means the Holy Grave, right? Sepulchre means in Latin, basically, means a grave. So this will be the entrance to the building. This is the interior, a building inside the building. The church was built in Constantine days and was dedicated 335. And by the way, it was dedicated in 2 buildings, right? One was above the tomb, which is here, and one was above Mount Calvary, which is a little hill inside the building as well. Today, it's one roof that covers both places. And the church that you see today, basically in front of you, is a Crusader one that was dedicated to celebrate the 50th anniversary to the conquest of Jerusalem, the Crusaders, and that was the 15th of July, 1149. Let me try to bring up one of the videos and see if I can show you the inside. If you've been there, fine. If not, that would be, I think, interesting for you to see. And you do know that I have no clue how to do it right, so didn't practice that for a while. So let's see if we can do that. All right. Well, of course, I'll be confused, not for the first time. I have no clue how to do that, but you're accustomed to that I don't have a clue how to do what here. That should work, and just give me a little sign if you can see that. So I'll make sure. Anybody? I can't see you, so somebody please unmute yourself and tell me that you can see that.
It's working.
It's working, thank you. Well, this is the upper chapel. This is basically the upper stair up to Mount Calvary itself, which is a little rock inside the building. This is the old Crusader decoration that you see in front of you, but some of the stations are located here on top. For example, station number 12 is marking the crucifixion. Station number 13, the body of Jesus taken off the cross, that it has on the cross, and 14 will be the tomb. That will be a building inside the building. Would you believe that? Not a single person. This is the Corona days. It was the first time in my life you're walking inside, there's nobody. It was about 2 months ago, nobody in the building. Usually the line to go inside can be almost all the way up to Jaffa Gate. Well, this will be marking the place of the crucifixion, will be right here. This will be the altar for the crucifixion. And all that will be on the upper floor of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, or the Church of the Holy Grave. Let's see if I can just move that to the next one. No, I'm sorry, it's just 1 or 2 that maybe I can do it like that. Can you see that now? Somebody please?
Yep. Yes, Ronnie, it's
Okay.
working.
All right. Well, this guy is kneeling, all right? This is marking the place where they prepared Jesus for his burial. So they took him from the cross, which is up the hill, down to the stone, all traditions, okay? And from here, they carried him to the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. That will be in the other part of the building. You do see the mosaic here, which is brand new, telling the story basically. And again, you go inside the church, every chandelier, every candle, every stone has its own story. And the church is divided to 5 sections today based on the 5 main groups that practice in the church. It also represents the tension among the Christians about purchasing those places. Politics is always involved as well, gives a lot of power. These are the stairs that go up to the upper gallery. That's the one that you saw earlier. Go up to Crucifixion Hill, basically, Golgotha. And the gates, these doors are 900 years old, as you can see them. And again, almost snowing inside. What you hear in the background is the Imam or the Muezzin calling for prayer. We are in the Christian quarter, but you can hear that all around the city when they call for prayer. Just to give a little taste, if you have not been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, how the place looks like. Let's go back now to this one and go to the other location, and that will be, of course, the Garden Tomb. And people always ask me, which is the true one? Well, go figure. And my answer is always, who cares about the true one? If you believe that this is the one, you're right, and we don't have to prove it in any way. However, just a story about the Garden Tomb. The Garden Tomb was discovered or identified by General Gordon. He was walking on the walls of the old city. When he came to Damascus Gate, he saw in front of him that formation that looked just like a skull. All right, here are the two eyes and the nose, and you'll remember that because you viewed that from the little balcony in the Garden Tomb. And that's what brought him to the conclusion that that must be Golgotha. And they looked around the area and they found a tomb. To be absolutely honest with you, the tomb is First Temple's days. I'll say it once again. The tomb in the Garden Tomb is not from the Roman era. It's from the days of the monarchy of Judea. And as far as they could tell, nobody was ever buried there. That fits the biblical story, right? The tomb that nobody was buried in there, basically, the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, were able to establish that this tomb, this particular one, is not a new one, wasn't a new one even back there. It doesn't mean that you cannot use that 700 years later, which is a possibility. But to make the assumption that the tomb in the Garden Tomb was indeed a new one made by Joseph of Arimathea, that would not be the tomb. To be, once again, absolutely honest with you, inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, this part of the ancient necropolis of Jerusalem, they did find some tombs over there, and maybe the tomb was in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and not necessarily in the Garden Tomb. Some of you do remember because we went to the museum, so to speak, the last series that we had, and I tried to show you on the model over there what's the connection between the two. And if you can bear with me for a minute, I can try to bring up that specific slide and speak about it once again, not to convince you about one or the other, but just to try to make a point. So please bear with me for a minute, all right, when I do a few things here. And let's go, will take me a second. Okay, that's the map I'm looking for. Here, this wall that you see in front of you is not standing yet. The wall of the city is this one. Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built here. The Garden Tomb will be around here. Let me remind you, if we believe the crucifixion took place atop of Mount Moriah, this is not Mount Moriah. Let me remind you once again, Mount Moriah is all of this. The upper city is over here, and there is a valley cutting through the city, all right? The central valley separating the city into two hills. This is Mount Moriah. So if this is Mount Moriah, it's impossible that the crucifixion took place where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is. What about the following possibility? Just a possibility, it's all speculations. Is it possible that the crucifixion took place indeed where the Garden Tomb is at? But the tomb was a tomb which is in the area of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and that's where the crucifixion, that's where the tomb was, and that's where the resurrection took place as well. Maybe the two are connected, because all the Bible tells us is that by the place of the cross, there was a garden and a tomb in it. Please define by. What would qualify to be by? If you agree with me that 600 yards can be also qualified as by, maybe we don't have to choose one or the other. Maybe the crucifixion took place here, and that was indeed the place of the tomb and the resurrection. That's one way to try to, if you wish, to coordinate or to reconcile the two possible locations together. By the way, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, interesting, this will be the Latin name. In Greek, they call it Anastasis, which means the Church of the Resurrection. The Greek Orthodox concept is, it's not when you go to Greek Orthodox Church, there's no crucifix. Basically, you see Jesus sitting on the throne as King of the universe. So the Catholic world is focusing on the Lent, if you wish, and the Greek Orthodox more the Advent. It's just a different concept how to represent Jesus as a suffering, crucified Messiah or as the King of the world. And when you go into a Roman Catholic church, there's always a crucifix. You go to a Greek Orthodox one, there's no crucifix. Usually Jesus is depicted sitting on the throne after the resurrection, just a different concept, a different liturgical calendar between the two. And all that happened after the Great Schism of 1054. Well, just to bring that to conclusion, and I just need to run the whole thing through once again to go to the last slide or so. Where are we? Just a minute. Okay, just the way of the cross around the world, so to speak. When the Ottoman Empire occupied Palestine from the Mamelukes, also Muslims, the Franciscans were simply expelled from the possessions of Mount Zion and from other parts of the country as well, which means that there used to be a time that to follow the Via Dolorosa was an impossibility. Not to lose the concept and not to lose their authority, they simply introduced the ways of the cross in different churches around the Catholic world. And that's what gave them another power. So interesting, it was the depiction of the Via of the Cross in churches around Europe that influenced the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem once the Franciscan came back. So there was always some kind of an interesting interaction between what was the Way of the Cross in Catholic churches around Europe and how it influenced the one in Jerusalem. For example, there had to be a connection between the Mount of Olives and the Christian possessions inside the old city, which means that the Muslims are going to build a new neighborhood and geographically will cut the way between the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Mount of Olives. You cannot visit the Christian holy sites and walk a certain path. And for that reason, it was very important for the Franciscans to occupy enough places along the way of the cross to maintain that contact with the Mount of Olives. So suddenly the Lion's Gate became to be important because that will be the gate that goes from Praetorium to the Mount of Olives. So as we said, always practical considerations, sometimes politics, sometimes money issues. But the important thing is that from the 14th century, not prior to that, there is a concept that's called the Way of the Cross that many people will follow. Some will end their journey to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Some will go to the Garden Tomb, 14 stations. As for the last century and a half, but there used to be 21 stations. They used to stop at the School of Mary. Well, who knows where was the School of Mary in Jerusalem? Nobody has a clue. But they used to add another one. And again, if you have the prerogative from the authorities to open a holy site or to open a station, maybe you bribe somebody, but you have the permission, you do understand the financial issue as well. Always a connection between politics and finances and money. But once again, we speak about the zeal of millions of people that really wanted to come to Jerusalem and to walk the way of the cross until this very day. And you see that procession every day, groups, well, not for the last 9 months, groups are carrying the cross and go along the path and stop at every station. Catholics, obviously, Armenians, Greek Orthodox. Usually we try to just go around them because they block the way. And we're not stopping when we go with our groups, of course, predominantly evangelical Americans, just follow the path without stopping at the various stations. So this is it, folks. This will be the story of the Way of the Cross. And I think that, yeah, we brought that to conclusion as well. Let me look at all of you now and bring up the gallery view. Okay, now I can see, well, most of you, not all of you. Hello, Lisa, and Nancy, and all the others. Okay, folks, feel free to unmute yourselves now, and we can have a short chat, a short conversation to speak about, well, what we spoke about today or any other time. This is presentation number 20, believe that? 20 meetings we had since April 30th. A lot of things happened along the way, including the passing of my parents. And what else? The corona pandemic. What else? The world is totally turned upside down in the last few months. So yeah, we covered some ground. And folks, I have to say that this format, this will be the last time that we're going to meet on Thursday evenings. And we'll take a short break, but I'll stay in touch with you. And the next interview we're going to do, it will be under the Galilee Academy. And trust me, the country is small, but there are many other things to see. So we'll have a series of different areas in the country, not necessarily to speak about the Judean desert, Galilee, the coast, River Jordan, and other places as well, to be more geography. And we'll have another 10 sessions, but not before January. All right, so that will be the plan. I'll let you know. And if you want to join us, that will be, again, free of charge. That will be under the umbrella, so to speak, of the Galilee Academy. Talk to me, anything.
Yeah, Ronnie, it's interesting that with all the change that we're going through in the last 2 to 3 years, the ladder is still standing on that second story of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Yeah, well, I didn't go there. But some of you know what the ladder is all about, just to demonstrate the real, what shall I say, craziness or whatever the term is, and with all the conflict in Jerusalem around those places from the 19th century. It was a terrible struggle among European powers that tried to get more influence in the Ottoman territory, including who owns what. And they had to come to some kind of a status quo, and the status quo is holding on in effect until this very day, 1878 made. And part of the status quo was that going to make an inventory of who owns what. And this is a book that has a lot of pages in it, that everything is done by the book. And when they wrote this inventory, who owns what, somebody forgot to include a ladder. There's a ladder standing outside the window over there that nobody can move from 1878 to maybe earlier, because if you move that, it's a violation of the status quo. I know it sounds ridiculous, but you do understand that you really want to maintain law and order, and you have no idea. Only about 6-7 years, there was a fist fight in the church. Because according to the status quo, when the Franciscan procession approaches every Friday at 3 p.m., by the way, Jordanian time, all right? The daylight saving, they go by the Jordanian time, right? When they make the way to the edicula, make the way to the tomb itself, they go by the office of the Greek Orthodox patriarch, and the door of the office must be closed. And somebody forgot the door open. You can say, hey, listen, just a mistake. No, it's a provocation. And we speak about a fist fight. You should see the candles flying in the air and chandeliers smashed to the ground. And the only time that the police was officially asked to come in to stop the riots was in that occasion. So today the status quo is really making things more civilized and people respect it. But sometimes you have those misunderstandings. You know how they open the church's door every day? Amazing, part of the status quo. 5 groups are practicing the church, they all have to be present. They open usually 5 a.m. The Armenian is coming from the Armenian quarter, walking, and the Egyptian Coptic is walking behind him. And they come down to the door. The keys to the church, the keys are held by a Muslim family. From the days of Saladin, 1187, it's a Muslim family, the Nusayba family have the keys to the church. So the Armenian is coming, knocking on the door from inside the building, 3 people approach. The Franciscan, the Greek Orthodox, and the, Ethiopian. And they climb a little ladder and open a little window in the door and lower the key. The Armenian holds the key. If the Egyptian dares to come even close, there will be an international crisis. And he's the one that sticks it inside the lock and opens the building. And from the inside, it has to be the Catholic that holds the door, right, to put it inside. Not the Greek Orthodox, never. And then he's helping him to, it sounds ridiculous, I understand, but at least it stopped the bloodshed. So every now and then there is a lot of tension because of the status quo and how not to violate it. And every now and then misunderstandings. And the Jewish state is supposed to find solutions to Christian problems and Christian wars in the holy places in Jerusalem.
Well, Ronny, speaking of the status quo, isn't the holding of the Haram Sharif, the Temple Mount, is under the Jordanian control as well because of the status quo?
But it's a different status quo.
Okay, different status quo. Okay, thank you.
Everything is working by status quo. But this one is from 1967. 1967, Israel and the Jordanians basically came to some kind of agreement. All right, but again, that was 67, not before that. And this status quo is not well maintained either.
No.
With the status quo, you're not supposed to raise any banners on top of Temple Mount. And you should see the Palestinian flag and Hezbollah and all the others are always there. And you're not supposed to have any kind of processions in a sense. So again, status quo is one thing. To keep in it, that's a problem. Yeah. Bus number 10, Rick and Celeste and Barry Lane. You're all there. There was a reunion, as I understand, right?
Put your face in there.
We got a chance to meet this week with Barry in Florida. There were several others here who have left. Kelly was here. The Goldsteins were here.
Yeah, Marilyn, she told me. Yeah.
Connie and Tom.
So we're the remnants. We are representing Best 10 tonight.
Good, Rick. Thank you for sending me the whole thing about Hebrew, Moses, etc. I watch it again. You know, opinions. Go figure. But it's interesting. Okay, folks.
It's very interesting. Yes.
Nothing else.
Ronny.
Yes.
Ronny, are the sites open now?
What can I say? Now, technically, from last Sunday, all the national parks were open, which means that the Christian holy site is supposed to be open. I was yesterday in Caesarea Philippi, it was open and then. By the way, off the record, you didn't hear from me, but they found in Caesarea Philippi a mosaic floor, and that will be a mosaic floor for church. We knew there was one because Eusebius, one of the fathers of the church who lived in Caesarea, speaks about a church over there and a statue of Jesus in it. No statue was found, but they found something that looks like a mosaic floor. And there will be something that the world media knows out sooner or later. We happened to be there, and the archaeologist was working. And we asked him, what is it that you found? And he said, I'm totally confused. Honest, this is a true story. He said, few things don't fit. I can tell that the mosaic floor is Byzantine, which means 4th century. And there's even somebody like myself, who's not a professional archaeologist, can say that this is something that, and he said, but on top of that, there are a few things that just shouldn't be there. And the place where the church is located is where the water used to flow from the cave down the River Jordan, right, into the valley. It's right on its way. So either it was an elevator platform, it was a waterway for the river to flow under it, didn't find it, or maybe something is wrong with the story. Remember, the Bible says that in Capernaum, a woman approached Jesus and touched his garment, and he felt power flowing out of him. The tradition said that her name was also Veronica, and she came from Caesarea Philippi. That's a tradition. So if that's the case, there has to be a house over there. But you know for a fact there was a church. And maybe they activated a church. So this, if this is indeed the case, but just to see the look on his face, the archaeologist said, you know what? It just doesn't fit. I see what I see. I try to make a story out of it, and a few things just don't fit. At least you have enough integrity to say, listen, you know what? I don't know. We have to make more excavations, but when the site is open to visits, they were not prepared for that, and therefore they had to protect the site. So part of the site is not accessible, just to make sure that nobody interrupts when they keep the excavations over there. University of Haifa, it's their project. So yeah, the sites, should be open now, but there are no visitors, which is a great time to visit. Yeah. It's so quiet. Just
so is country open? Is Israel open for visits?
Well, not for outsiders. I mean, you cannot come, if you want to come to Israel today, there are flights, but you'll have to quarantine yourself for 14 days. The US is a red country, so is Israel now. So who would come under those conditions? But I have to tell you, I have a group from not just from Austin, and they insist they're supposed to come in December. And we are working now vis-a-vis the Ministry of Tourism to consider them as a capsule. But if they have the test, if they take the test, getting on the plane in the US of A, all right, and they are proven negative, to come over here, we are, a tour group is a classical capsule. We go together from place to place. We're in the same bus all the time. We'll have, our meals in the same dining room in a hotel, for example. So it will be easy to maintain this kind of isolation, but we have to have special permits. So we'll try to work on that. If they really come, we'll be the only group in the country. So let's get it for December, and who knows, maybe we'll have a miracle.
God willing.
We'll see. Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Ronny, I got a question about camping over in Israel.
In Nablus. I don't even know what, but I can't remember.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Sue.
I have a question about camping in Israel. Are there designated sites, or people just go out wherever? How does that work?
Not as well developed as the US of A. We don't have KOAs, and we don't have more than maybe 2 or 3 campsites, but they're very basic. You won't find a single camper, a single RV all over Israel. It just, the country is not big enough, and it's simply not part of our maybe culture. Maybe it will happen. So camping, as you know it in America, doesn't exist. We don't have, all the hookups and all the whatever. It's different. They do have few places you can rent a tent, right, to bring a tent with you, but we don't have more decent facilities. Now they start developing, they have some glampings, as they call them, in 1 or 2 places, right, a little kind of a higher level of camping, but it doesn't cover the whole country. I can think about 2 places in Galilee, maybe 1 in Jerusalem, but the services are just, very basic.
Yeah.
When I was in the US and we drove a motorhome around the country for 6 months, that was in 2002. It was a good time that we were with the family because, yeah, tourism was kind of devastated. It was an old Fleetwood made bounder, 1991 made. This was 2002. So I was kind of getting familiarized with the whole world of outdoors. It was a shock to me. I did not know how great it is in America, but yeah, that's what we did for 6 months. And I know all about whitewater, gray water, hookups, everything that you need to know. All the KOAs and all the others. And you know, one morning we woke up in Bangor, Maine. It was October, and the water simply froze in the hose. So we understood it's time to head south. all the way to Key West. I have to tell you, from Seattle all the way to Key West and back.
Wow.
That was our journey. Yeah, it was real fun.
In addition to that question, Scott is interested in the walk. There's some kind of hike that goes from the north south, possibly
Yep.
the hike that Jesus hiked.
No,
Is
no.
camping along there?
These are two things, Sue. We have the equivalent of the Appalachian Road. That will be the Cross Israel Road that goes indeed from north to south, but that will take about close to 2 months to follow. In Galilee, there's a place called the Jesus Trail. It starts in Nazareth, and it goes all the way down to the Sea of Galilee. It will be about 2 days. And along the way, no camping, but the path goes through some towns and villages, and there's a lot of what they call road angels. They'll be more than happy to accommodate people, sometimes free of charge. So just follow the signs, and it takes you to some Arab villages and local Arab Christians. We're more than happy to open the doors and take people in, just have a chat and a conversation. So it's not kind of really institutionalized, but you find accommodation. If you take the Jesus Trail, as they call it, in 2 days, starts in Nazareth, goes through the hills of Galilee, down to the Sea of Galilee, ends in Capernaum. You can easily find a place to stay overnight
Okay.
if you follow this one. And it's downhill, which is a good thing. Well, folks, thank you once again. And we'll stay in touch, huh? Stay in touch. Please feel free to email me about anything. I'm always available. And don't have that many things to do anyhow. Just do my studies, and in the process of authoring 2 more books, see how it will turn out. When they'll be out, I'll make sure to let you know.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ronnie.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
You're welcome.
Bye, thank you.
I know.
Shalom.
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 Toda.